This crisis in affordable rental housing goes far beyond the Crossroads example, affecting hundreds of other properties, large and small, across the region. So what role does government play in shaping public policy to meet the crisis?
When the market isn't working, that's a place where government intervenes. And I think there is agreement across the political spectrum that government's role should be to actually foster the market to work well.
Policy and regulation will not solve market demand versus supply issues. It's not a solution. It's not a good long-term solution. It might feel good or it might sound good, but I think oftentimes that's not what's going to solve the supply issue.
Our public policy tools for dealing with this problem are really lacking. And partly because this is a traditional private enterprise, this part of the affordable housing sector, so we haven't had tools to deal with it.
There's no here's the 3 things that you can do so that everybody is fairly housed by Friday. It's an adaptive challenge that requires behavior change. It requires a new allocation of resources and a new will to make the kind of persistent, durable investments that we make, to be honest, in other communities, but that we have not done in the places in which communities of color call home.
It's a cyclical market. Time takes care of that. The Class A buildings of today are the Class B buildings of tomorrow. Unfortunately, that's not an answer for people who are looking for housing right now and they need someplace to live next month. Well, it's going to be better in 10 years' time. Well, so we get that.
In 2014, the region was able to build 770 new affordable units using all of our resources and all of our efforts. When the 700 units in Crossroads were converted, that in effect canceled out virtually all of that gain from that year's worth of effort.
If this is ultimately a supply and demand issue, why not just increase the supply?
First and foremost is that we have to try to increase the supply of non-luxury rental housing, because ultimately this is a supply and demand, and it's very challenging to push against the market. So you have to work with the market, and that means for local governments is to look at their zoning, allow more places that multifamily housing can be created.
Cities need to be more pro-development, especially for multifamily. There's a lesson here to take away, and that is let's open up more opportunities for development and even for their engagement and subsidization of that, to say we don't want to repeat this again.
Developing more housing at all different income levels, providing more opportunities for subsidized housing, affordable housing, to be developed in all different communities is an important part of a regional solution. It's not up to any one city or town or community.
Everyone talks about a diversified investment portfolio. You want a little bit of this, you want a little bit of that, in order to be resilient to whatever happens in changing economic conditions. We see the same thing in the housing market.
So you need to have some units that are affordable, some that'll be affordable for middle class, some that are for those who are more affluent. So you need to have a diversity of housing. And so I think as you look at these cities and these counties, what we're trying to do is to make sure that the housing stock will meet those various levels of need and that it's available throughout the county. So it's not just in one community, but shared throughout the county.
Regions that address their inequality achieve greater economic growth.
Those communities actually economically do better. The kids do better in those communities. The education of those children is better, et cetera. So there's all kind of important effects for life outcomes when we think about our housing patterns.
Part of the reason we're suffering these issues right now is because of our strong economy in multifamily rental housing. But the upside of that is it creates the possibility of creating mixed income housing policies, or inclusionary housing policies as they're called, where you either require or incent market rate developers to include affordable units in their developments. And a number of cities have enacted those the last couple of years or are looking at them right now.
Inclusionary zoning is using somebody else's capital to achieve your result. So yeah, maybe there's a bargain that's struck there on that, but would far rather see a wiser use of existing resources more creatively than saying to the market, well, we're going to regulate you so that you do provide this product.
We need a public investment. Cities can do a little bit of, but it really has to, in Minnesota, has to come from the state government.
You can't expect the market to provide deepest affordability and the most durable affordability without significant subsidy or incentive. And you can't expect the nonprofit or public sector to do so without resources.
We need to invest in housing. We just do. We have not invested in affordable housing in the state of Minnesota for generations now. We need to do major investments in housing, creative investments, and create incentives for the private sector to partner with us to create more affordable housing. And I just don't believe that we've done enough in this area.
Our federally subsidized and state and locally subsidized housing supply is really critical and is, for the most part, very well maintained and quite good housing, contrary to the kind of outmoded expectations that some people have. But the problem is so large that we got to figure out, how do we preserve all of our resources in this area?
In addition, we need to hold on to the lower cost rental housing that we have.
Preserving the affordable housing that we have, whether it's the naturally occurring or existing subsidized affordable housing, is by far the most cost-effective way of ensuring continued affordable housing. And there are organizations that are becoming increasingly interested in protecting these, in predicting which are the properties that are most vulnerable to upscaling, and trying to take efforts to protect those properties.
So nonprofit organizations like Common Bond have, I think, a really unique opportunity and value proposition in this space and at this time.
One of the new trends that we're beginning to see is the sale of apartment buildings to nonprofit owners who have a mission purpose in maintaining the affordability.
We can also balance the physical needs of the property with the desire to keep rents low. And to the extent that we have concessionary capital, cheap and patient money, we can then make more concessions on rent and make more improvements to property because our return expectations are lower. We can always make sure as well to accept Section 8 and other housing vouchers so that folks that have a hard time finding places, properties that will rent to them with those kind of benefits, can find places in great opportunity areas.
There's something new that's kind of emerging nationally, and it's beginning to happen here in the Twin Cities, and that is impact investors or socially motivated investors are assembling resources, essentially investment capital, that can be used to acquire these properties that are at risk.
We're looking at a double bottom line. We want a social return as well as a financial return.
The reason I think that socially motivated investors are beginning to be attracted and beginning to make investments in affordable housing, in naturally affordable housing, is because it is a good investment.
Individuals and institutions who are interested in working in this space are willing to make a little less than they would in other investments and have a patient eye toward the future, can help us preserve affordability for low-income people.
You get the satisfaction of having helped the community, helped a workforce stay stable, helped kids stay in the same schools, helped frail elderly or disabled or other people who have limited means continue to live in an older but affordable, naturally affordable building.
For this particular fund, the NOAA Impact Fund, their goal is to facilitate the acquisition of 1,000 rental apartments over basically a 2.5 year period. And hopefully that goes well, and then they'll repeat it and repeat it and repeat it.
That is going to be proof of concept. Can you satisfy the needs of the community and keep rents affordable and repay the investors on time, and by doing that, attract the interest of other investors at a greater scale, or at least continue to repeat the process over time. And that is our plan of action.
And then finally, you need to work in the realm of just providing basic protections to low-income tenants.
As a tenant advocate, rent control, some sort of rent regulation is ultimately likely what's needed. We've been talking about some other strategies to try to prevent displacement in terms of just or for-cause eviction.
Some of it just has to do with enforcing housing codes because, again, with the market as tight as it is, you could have unscrupulous or just marginal owners basically maintaining their housing by not maintaining it.
The lack of resources that are going to maintaining the conditions is contributing to investors being able to come in and flip these properties.
It is that multi-pronged strategy of a legal strategy, an electoral strategy, right, that gets elected officials who truly reflect and represent the people in those communities. It is public policy, land use, zoning. It is organizing and building power. The best success will be when we have all 4 or 5 of those strategies working in synergy.
I think it's really up to the political leaders, both rural and urban. It's really up to each citizen in our community to actually step up to the plate and really think about what kind of community we want to be in. Because, you know, people of color, low-income people aren't going anywhere, right? And just blaming them and shutting the door in your nice, cozy room isn't going to save you either. Or building walls isn't going to save us. What's really going to save us is us actually saying, here's what it takes to move up in our society, and then holding people accountable to that.
So we should be doing those things that can take the world as it is and make it better. And at the same time, I think we have to go much further upstream, and we have to really address some of these larger structural and institutional and human issues, I don't know what the right word is, that essentially, again, is prioritizing who gets resources in our cities and regions, who gets the persistent, durable investments that can make a community strong and vital and thriving.
I think the hope for the future lies in a change in mindset. I think we have to start looking at affordable housing as critical infrastructure. And what I mean by that is that we cannot assume that housing, particularly affordable housing, will be a natural byproduct of a healthy economy and a healthy society. We have to understand that housing is actually a key ingredient for a healthy economy and a healthy society. And so we need to invest in it. It is a critical investment that we can make as a community in order to maintain our prosperity and make the Twin Cities a better place to live.
That's how we're going to get a stronger region. It's not by letting people who are falling behind fall even further behind.